I know.
Shh, 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 shh. 3 seconds. All right, good. Beautiful. Okay, we had, gentlemen, we've set up the reasons or the causes of the war, and now the war begins, as we had said. And remember that Germany had basically all of their long-term plans for the possibility of war. They, remember, had counted on Belgium staying neutral and not fighting, Russia taking a long time to mobilize, Britain not getting involved, right? And they did not count on trench warfare. What do we know actually happened?
Russia mobilized.
Everything the opposite of what they had planned for. Belgium, some would say foolishly, decided to fight. But on the other hand, of course, they're fighting for their territorial integrity. Russia, which is considered, a backwards, technologically behind country, mobilizes quickly. Doesn't mean that they all of a sudden gain some new technology, but they attack quickly. Britain respects their 80-year-old okay, you got to stop. Their 80-year-old what then? So we don't know? Alliance or treaty with Belgium. Come on. Which had said, we will defend them if they're attacked. Okay? And remember also, when the Schlieffen Plan was put in place, what route was Germany taking to get to France? Northern or southern route? Germany was taking a northern route. The French's Plan 17 was taking a southern route. And both sides realized, we can't obviously, be two giant ships passing in the night. So they have to send their men to the other front, fouling up all of their plans. And the word you should circle or phrase you should circle is, this leads to a huge front or trench warfare, which of course meant they would exponentially increase the number of casualties, because not only do you have trench warfare, which was bad enough with Civil War technology, now you have machine guns, you have mustard gas. It is as bad as can possibly be. Hey, but we can at least take comfort in the fact that, everyone said a big technological, expensive, major participation war, of course, would only last how long? What was the prediction? A year at most. It was some said a couple of weeks. It would be too expensive to have nations involved in such a highly technological war with such giant amounts of weapons and so on. We know that all goes out the window too. They borrow, they print money, and they get more and more men. So this is a long, drawn-out affair. Let's focus on Belgium. Belgium has a lot to do with what the United States is thinking about this war. The British, you might remember, did their best to report the German atrocities in Belgium. The deaths, the attacks on little towns, and then in August of 1914, the Germans rolled through the Belgian town of Louvain. Louvain had a huge medieval library containing some of the oldest texts in world and European history. I'm talking about texts written out by monks, original editions of books and Bibles and stuff like that, burned to the ground. This painted the Germans, gentlemen, as enemies of all civilization. And of course, you go to the movies in 1914, and this is what they'll report: the brutal German atrocities against the Belgians and all humanity. Okay, right. Here's our map. Hopefully they don't shut us down for just showing a simple map of Europe. Right? Germany and Austria allied. You have Turkey. You have the Allied powers in green. Here is the Western Front. Of course, the Eastern Front, much, much longer between Russia, Romania, Austria-Hungary, and Germany. Okay? And, of course, you have some neutral nations as well. More importantly, for our purposes, in the United States, why do we have this sense that we should remain neutral? What is the typical U.S. reaction towards this war when they read it in the newspapers? Tom?
Nothing to do with us.
Yes, it has nothing to do with us. Whoa, there's still kings? And what the heck's a Kaiser and a czar? Those things are still around? You know, we have been so, advanced in the technology and all the changes that have taken place. You know, this war is a perfect example of what George Washington meant years ago when he said we should stay out of European affairs, get away from those alliances. Their beefs and their complaints are ancient and old and are destructive. Yeah.
And didn't they benefit a lot from the war in the beginning because of trade?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that a little bit. Sure. Trade. We didn't take these notes?
We just started.
Good. Okay. So, look, when we declared neutrality, President Woodrow Wilson had said we want the Americans to be neutral in mind as well as in deed. Try not to speak out your affinity towards Germany or your hatred of the British. Look, the Irish were still, controlled by the British at this time, fighting viciously for their independence. You might have some Irish Americans saying, yeah, I really hope the British lose. Maybe I want the Germans to win. German Americans in New York, other places, might say, hey, I'm in favor of the fatherland winning. There was also tremendous pro-British sentiment, especially expanded because of the propaganda, because of the British control of the media. There's just a report the other day. I don't know if I talked about this with you. Do you know about the underwater cables between ourselves and Europe and the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Right. It was just in the news that you think that you get on your phone and you're in so-called the cloud, right? I Google something and I find a website that's in Buenos Aires. Yeah, there may be a connection between myself and a satellite here in New York, but eventually that data goes on a fiber optic wire along the Atlantic Ocean, right, to Buenos Aires. And then from there, maybe it hits another satellite and goes to whoever it's going to go to. We depend massively on thousands of underwater cables that occasionally do break and have to be replaced. I heard recently the island of Fiji or somewhere, some Pacific island, their cable was snapped. Nobody had internet access, for weeks and weeks. It's a big deal to restring all that cable. Google and Amazon now have their own facilities. Well, guess what Britain did? Back then, of course, there were telegraph cables and telephone cables. Britain went and found the U.S. cable that connected us to Germany and cut it. Germany had no direct contact with the United States, at least via wire, which meant we got all of our information about the war from the British, who were pushing us to join the war, right? Obviously, that's pretty important. You can imagine, how this was so big and why, control of Facebook and so on was such a big deal in 2016, right? But as you mentioned, Wilson declares neutrality, but, and this is an important thing, asserts that as neutrals, we have the right to trade with anyone we want. Right?
The propaganda that British did was the cutting of the wire.
Propaganda was used to influence public opinion. Among the things they did to control the information, they cut the wire between Germany and the United States, right? And got their information to us as opposed to Germany's version of events. So they painted the Germans as absolute monsters in what they were doing in Belgium, and they were pretty good at it. I mean, we created an entire administration of the federal government called the Food Administration, whose sole purpose was to raise food in the United States to be shipped as humanitarian aid to the starving Belgians. A young politician named Herbert Hoover became a star by running the Food Administration. Okay? All right. When we do declare our neutrality, we do have to respect a few international rules that had been created in Geneva and other places around that time. If we are going to trade with nations that are belligerents, a belligerent is a nation at war, like Germany or England, we had to agree not to ship so-called contraband, weapons of war, and to protect, themselves against neutral nations, using neutrality as a cover to trade with enemies. Belligerent nations had the right to stop neutral ships, and as long as they treated them fairly, they were allowed to search and, if needed, seize any weapons or illegal contraband on their ships. So, what do you think happened to the price of American-made goods with war?
Went up.
Well, European nations at war, desperate for our goods, they're going to pay high prices. And what's weaponry? I'm Smith and Wesson. I'm a weapons manufacturer. You can imagine the prices are pretty high.
So now the initial pricing of it is even higher. Then the shipping prices go up.
Everything goes up. Now the question for you, of course, is it worth it? Look, if I'm shipping oranges, if I'm shipping wheat, in theory, non-war goods, I ship them to some contact I have in Germany, and they're happy to buy our goods because they want to feed their people. Right? In theory, that's not supposed to be touched. And if a British ship stops my ship and says, hey, Febles, where are you going? I'm going to Germany. Oh, really? Our enemy? Let's check it. Go through the cargo holds. All I have is oranges and wheat. Ha! In theory, they're supposed to let us go. No war weapons of war that we found. Britain, however, would kind of scam on that. Britain would stop our ship and say, yeah, well, it's wheat, right? Are there soldiers in Germany? Well, of course there are. Do they eat? Well, yes, they do. It might go to feed their soldiers. Guess what? We determined that wheat or those oranges are weapons of war. What are you talking about? Here's your choice, Febles. Either we sink your ship to the bottom of the ocean, or we divert your ship to go to London, Liverpool. We'll give you a pretty nice price. Probably not the price you're getting in Germany, but do you want zero and loss of life, or do you want some money for this? What do you think I would choose?
Some money for it.
Of course. Fine. I go back to my supplier and say, hey, this is what happened. We got busted. You know what I mean? Now, Germany had a different issue. What type of ships, of course, dominate their navy?
U-boats.
Of course, U-boats. Hey, a British ship stops me on the high seas. I can see it from miles away. I know, oh my God, that's a British man of war. Here it comes. They're going to investigate us. Luckily, though, the British never shot any of our ships. They just kind of stole many of our goods. Germans, though, had a different issue. Submarine catches you. You're seen in the periscope of a German submarine. They're underwater. What they know, they say, oh, look at this. Here's the ship. And we even know who the captain is. It's Febles. This is his sixth trip across. We know that Febles has an uncle who works for Smith and Wesson. We should blow this thing out of the water. Look, if a German submarine were to surface and try to stop our ship, we could actually take out in those days, you could take out a German submarine with a few handguns. I shoot a couple shots at it. It's a floating tin can. That thing goes to the bottom of the ocean. The entire utility or usefulness of a submarine was its secrecy. So usually in those days, a submarine had two choices: either do nothing and just report back, yeah, there goes the Febles ship again, or shoot the thing out of the water.
From underwater?
From underwater. We send a torpedo, we blow it up. We tell our superiors back in Germany, yeah, guess what? We just took care of Febles' ship. Yeah, except one problem. You just bombed an American ship, and you might draw the U.S. into the war on the side of Germany. Germany has a tough issue with this. Okay? It's unfair. And we know that the Germans know that the British are stopping tons of American ships. The British go one step further. In their war with, remember, Germany creates a no-float zone. You're not, as an American ship, allowed to go from America to London. But American merchants, looking at the sweet prices they were getting in London, in Liverpool, would just take their chances and say, there's no way the British would actually attack us. They know they need our neutrality. So we would sail like crazy to England. And even if the German submarines did occasionally attack us, pretty hard for them to find us. They have to police, this entire island. Germany, on the other hand, has only one small area on the North Sea, area around this border here near Hamburg, right? And guess what the British do? They place as many underwater mines outside the ports of Hamburg and others to encourage American ships. Yeah, don't try it. Don't know what an underwater mine. Come on, you've all seen. What do you call it? You've seen Finding Nemo, right? Basically a bomb attached to a chain that's linked to a big block at the bottom of the ocean.
Those are real.
Yes. Here's the surface. Here's your ship. Boom. You don't even see it, and you go blow up a jail. That. So your choice again as an American merchant is sail your goods to Hamburg, and just out of the blue, you without even being seen, one of two things could happen, or two of three things could happen. Either nothing, and you're lucky, and you make it to Germany, or you bump into an underwater mine and you blow up, or you get bombed by an unseen German torpedo. What do you think a lot of American merchants decided to do? Go to England. Maybe you don't get the same price, but you stay alive. As a result of this, gentlemen, trade between the United States and Germany and the U.S. and Britain starts to go in two different directions. So international law said belligerents could stop any ship. And look, if a neutral ship refused to stop, if a British or German ship demanded that an American ship stop, we just want to search you, and we refused, after a number of warnings, a shot across the bow and all that stuff, technically an American ship could be bombed. But nobody wanted to get to that point. And the British, they defined contraband very broadly. They basically said oranges, sweet potatoes, wheat, and guns all count as contraband. The other thing the British did, sometimes American ships would say, well, what if we just sail to Portugal? What if we sail to neutral Spain? And some German agent can pick up our goods there. The British got wind of that and said, look, you can't sail to Spain. We see that as part of continuous voyage. Your goods are probably going to go to Germany, so we're stopping your ship. Look, the British violated our shipping tremendously. But the one thing they didn't do was they didn't kill anyone. Occasionally, a German submarine captain would get fed up and would lob a torpedo at an American ship and attack it. Not often, but it did happen enough. It only takes one or two to evoke the massive condemnation of President Wilson or the United States press. But this is the way the Germans saw it. In 1915, 1 year into the war, U.S.-German trade, which had once been at as high as $169 million, was now down to $1 million. Hardly anyone trading with Germany for fear of being attacked or bombed or exploded by an underwater mine. And British trade ballooned. It was already 5 times that of German trade, and now it triples or quadruples from 824 million a year up to 3 billion. From the German perspective, guys, are we neutral? No. Their thinking is we are hand in hand with the British. But Wilson still maintained we are not. We are just operating as free merchants. If Germany happens to be losing the battle of the Atlantic, as you will, well, that's their problem. But we have the right to trade with whomever we want. Okay? That obviously is going to be an issue. Okay? Go ahead.
They got that in 1950.
Right? U.S.-British trade really increases. Morgan is a big part of that. J.P. Morgan, whose family business has, the House of Morgan that exists in London as well, is a big supporter of Britain, offers all kinds of cash, all kinds of loans, even before we get involved in the war. Morgan is heavily financing the British industrial and war machine. Right? So, ostensibly, we are really on Britain's side without really saying it. Everyone good? Come on, fellas. In effect, we can really just determine that the German U-boat blockade, as scary as the U-boat was, it really wasn't as effective as the overall British blockade. All right, a couple of key dates, things you should know, where Germany just goes over the line. In May of 1915, the famous ocean liner Lusitania leaves New York City amid thousands of posters. Guys, in the same place where you leave, anyone ever go on a cruise from Manhattan's west side? Dude, you got to do nothing.
No,
You've got to go on a cruise. It's so cool. You leave the
I
west
saw
side of
the
Manhattan.
Titanic. I know
You
what
sail
happens.
out underneath.
Everybody can run.
You sail out underneath the Verrazano Bridge.
Really?
So cool. I went to Bermuda. You got to do this.
I don't like ships. Man.
Yes.
The Titanic.
I swear to God, it's like a
Titanic got
floating
me
building.
messed up.
I sailed all the way to
It's expensive.
Bermuda and back. It did not once feel the boat shake.
You gotta pay
Just swim.
It's like a giant concrete building floating.
Yeah, it's expensive.
You got the jet ski?
Not that expensive. Not that bad.
They banned
Especially
the
when it's
jet
all
skis
green.
in some Caribbean islands.
They banned what?
They banned they banned jet skis in some Caribbean islands.
Jet ski.
People get hurt.
Johnny tried
Cruises are
to take
nice.
it. Johnny tried to take it home.
Anyway, gents, look, all over New York City and all during, yeah,
What is that, 12,000?
1,200 people that died.
Oh,
Okay, Lusitania, all over New York City and in the New York Times and all kinds of newspapers, the Germans had taken out ads and put up posters saying, "Achtung, beware, Americans, don't sail on British ships. Don't sail in the war zone." The Lusitania was headed for Liverpool. Don't sail there. It's sailing in British waters. The Germans reserved the right to attack British ships. Almost everybody ignored that, right? We are already a year into the war, a little less than a year into the war, and most Americans said no way the Germans would ever attack an ocean liner. It's a cruise. This is not a war vessel. Right? The Germans suspected that the Lusitania was being used, among other things, to carry weapons. They actually were right. None of the passengers knew that. But even if they were carrying weapons, the logic is, why would the Germans decide to attack an ocean liner with 1,200 or 2,000 people on it? My God. Yes, question.
So it says 1,200 and 120.
1,200 total.
Yeah.
128 of them were killed, were American. You got it? Most were European, but 128 Americans were killed. And crazy thing, you should read, if you ever wanted to, read a great book called Dead Wake about the Lusitania. Very interesting book. But it was kind of cool. Everyone knew that there was a possibility, and a lot of people even thought that the Lusitania was so big that a torpedo from a submarine wouldn't even hurt it. Many saw the actual torpedo going in the water towards the ship. And we're like, all right, it's going to hit the ship. It'll either bounce off, or if it does go in, it'll be a little explosion. It'll be contained down below. It was amazing. It took a while for it actually to bring the ship down, right? It's believed that it hit some other explosives in parts of the ship hold. And,
I think so many people died.
you
Got my
know,
notes down.
hey, it goes down. They just did not have the time. The waters are frigid.
Otherwise,
And it's just off the southern coast of Ireland. People tried to race from Southern Ireland to go and save people, and did save some, but tons were trapped inside. So Wilson demands an apology, gets it from the Germans, and the Germans each time say, "Look, this was in international waters, but we are sorry. We will not attack neutral ships anymore." In September of 1915, another ship was attacked. Same thing. The Germans apologized. In March of 1916, yet again. After each incident, the Germans promised to stop firing on neutral ships, but on each one they said, but the British have to adhere to their part of the bargain. They have to stop their commercial attacks on the U.S. And of course, they did not. There is a story and a belief that the Secretary of the Navy or Minister of the Navy in England, a gentleman by the name of Winston Churchill, wanted the U.S. into the war and allowed the Lusitania to be hit. Truth of the matter was, all ocean liners that came from America, anytime they got near England, when they got to Ireland, would get a Navy escort. The British Navy would send ships out to escort the ship all the way to England. The Lusitania didn't get that. No reason why. And some believe that Churchill might have wanted it to would have allowed it to get hit, so that the Americans would be outraged and would come in on the war. That's a pretty harsh thing to accuse, but some have accused Churchill of doing just that. If he did, it did not work. The United States, Wilson, at least at the time, was very committed to keeping us out of war. By 1916, he is on his re-election campaign, right? And there is still a very strong isolationist bent in the United States that says, hey, President Wilson, We do not want to be part of this. Okay? He runs for re-election, gentlemen. What is it, Stack? What are you doing there with your calculator? Come on.
Nothing.
He wants his re-election, gentlemen, which is going to be rare. Remember, since the Civil War, he's only the second Democrat ever to get elected president. The other, who's got it? Everyone's been Republicans. Grover Cleveland, won twice. Wilson is now running to try to win in 1916. His campaign was a phrase that had his picture and a nice arch saying he kept us out of war. How do you go against that? He ends up winning re-election. However, in 1917, things quickly change. Russia, who had lost upwards of 2 million men up to this point on that huge Eastern Front we talked about, having gained almost nothing from this war, Tsar Nicholas had driven his country to the verge of starvation. A massive communist uprising overthrows him. You might remember the stories of him killing his family and all that. And the first thing that Lenin's government, the new communist government, do when they defeat Tsar Nicholas is they pull us out. They pull the Russians out of the war. They had been advertising this war as a foolish imperialist war where Nicholas was sending his men to death just so he could get a couple of more acres of territory in Poland or something, having no benefit to the Russian people, the poor Russian peasants. So the communists pull out of the war. They make a deal with the Germans known as the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. Russia, after 2 million deaths and 3 years of fighting, settles with Germany. Think about that. They lost 2 million men and got nothing out of it. Right? You can imagine the resentment towards Nicholas. On the other hand, if you're Germany, what do you think after all this fighting on two fronts?
Finally, we get to attack France.
Yeah, this is it. What are they going to do? They're going to take their men from the eastern frontier and move them across and finish off France and Britain on the western front. This will be the final nail. Okay? Not as easy as it sounds. Right? Actually, many of those German soldiers are told, great, you get to move across Germany and go to the western front. You would think that they're gung-ho, they're ready to go. Actually, their morale dropped. They got to march through their own country, sometimes seeing their own family on their way to the western front and see how badly they were doing. In other words, the German soldiers started to realize how bad this war was for Germany. What are we benefiting? What are we getting out of this? Our people are starving. Mom's dying over here. As they head to the western front, their enthusiasm drops. Of course, in America, we don't know that. There's a sense that the United States, there's more pressure for the United States to get into the war. January 1917, Germany throws out any pretense of neutrality. They pretty much give up on the idea of staying neutral respecting neutral ships. And they tell the United States, no more neutral ships. All ships are subject to being attacked. They called it unrestricted subwarfare. No longer would submarine captains be told, don't fire on American ships. Fire at anything you see. Any neutral, any enemy ship, you've been warned. A couple ways for Wilson to go with this, right? What could you do if you're Wilson?
Declare war on Germany.
You declare war on Germany and say, how dare you? Or you could say, hey, Americans, how about you don't travel over there? What if we ban you from traveling to Europe? Hard one, right? On one hand, you do that, you probably save a lot of lives. But now we've just given up our integrity, our sovereignty, and a foreign nation can tell us what to do. On the other hand, if we say, oh no, we got to draw the line, we could be getting involved in a rather ugly war, and maybe at the wrong time, just as Germany is able to send its men to the Western Front. Well, while we're debating this, a number of other things change. The British intercept, of course, a famous note that Ambassador Zimmerman was sending to Mexico. Hey, Mexico, join us in the war, and we'll give you back territory you lost to America. Pretty preposterous and ridiculous note. Few really took it seriously. I don't know. That's like Kim Jong-un saying to the United States, do what I say or I'm going to take California away from you. You know what I mean? Yes, not a fun thing to read. Certainly sounds dangerous, but probably not something to take seriously. But it still made good copy in the newspapers, and lots of people said, oh, let's get involved in the war. And then, of course, in March of 1917, the Germans make good on their promise. They said they were going to attack American ships, and in March, they start attacking them. American merchant ships start getting hit left and right, traveling to Britain and other parts of Europe. Now the ball is in Wilson's court. He could tell those ships to stand down and stay home, or he could say, we're going to go and get involved in the war. He had just gotten elected. What was his platform? He kept us out of war. He gets inaugurated on March 4th, and less than a month after his re-inauguration, he goes to Congress and asks for a declaration of war on Germany. The famous phrase he used was to make the world safe for democracy. Germany was a threat to all democracy, and just in the same way as Lincoln had basically said in his Gettysburg Address, why are we doing this, right? So that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, right, can be maintained. Wilson is making that same distinction. We are now at war with Germany. Right, let's look at how we get involved. You guys still taking notes? First thing, preparedness. There's a movement now quickly to tell everyone to get mobilized. Hey, young Fordham Prep students, you might get drafted. You might have to serve. You better prepare. They tell schools across the country you should have at least once a week, if not every day, physical education classes, phys ed classes. Come out of the World War I movement to say, look, students have to be ready because they may go off to war. They had better be physically fit. Okay? Therefore, there's this idea of preparedness. People who work in office buildings would be told, practice drilling. Practice, go on company retreats, practice shooting guns just in case, And just as in Europe, where the armies were huge, in World War I, Wilson pushes for the second draft in American history. We're going to need so many soldiers. We're going to demand that each state draft a certain number of soldiers. They made a couple of amendments. First of all, no rich people were able to buy their way out of service. Where did we remember that happened? Civil War. You could buy your way out, and it caused riots and all kinds of resentment. Here, you get drafted, you are in. Second, if you are someone who might be loyal to the Germans or to the other enemies, Austrians, whatever it might be, and there was actually a discovery of a German bomb package on a New York City subway that made huge headlines. They passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Not only if you are caught spying for Germany, but if you are caught speaking out or writing against the Americans' war effort, you could be thrown in jail. Where have we seen the Sedition Act before?
Jefferson.
Way back under Adams, and Jefferson was the protester when we were about to possibly fight France. Right? Remember, the big question is, do I have the right to speak out against the government? Obviously, what amendment gives us that right? First Amendment. Here, in 1917, the same restriction is put in place. We are at war. Our nation is in danger. Therefore, we can, at least in part, suspend one of those basic American civil liberties. Okay? Anti-government speech could end up in imprisonment, and, gentlemen, you're a foreigner or a member of the opposition, you could be deported. Actually, no joke, deported like 1,500 communists around that time. Right? One key leader, a guy named Eugene Debs, stood up and spoke out. He was a key union leader, well-known union leader at the time. He ended up speaking out against the war, against the draft, telling people not to go and sign up for the draft. He was promptly taken down off the stand, sent to jail with a 10-year sentence. Right? One of the first big popular music hits and war protest songs ever was written around the time. where people did. There was a pretty big movement that said we didn't want to get involved in the war. You can look it up tonight. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier.
So, was the sense of like cowardness no longer felt? Like,
Cowardice?
yeah. So remember, like in the Civil War, like people who didn't go to war, that as a young able male, they were looked upon as like scared. Is that sense lost?
I don't know if it's lost, but you would be accused of that if you didn't want to go. But you could easily say, I'm not going to go fight for a government that just wants to make money. There was a sense that the government was just out to make money on this. Okay? Good guys.
Yeah.
Why do you keep shaking the desk?
Yeah,
Get that light.
I'm not gonna be here.
Huh?
I'm not gonna be here on Friday, so that's why I was wondering.
Okay, are you here Monday?
I'm here Monday, not Tuesday, because I'm going to Georgetown Tuesday.
Okay, so Monday you take the test.
No, I'm here.
Oh, you're
Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah. Just for like homework or any other.
What are we doing today?
You can do those sticks.
Stick passing. Do you know? Do you know what what the first meet like? What are we gonna try?
Probably most 1 or 200, and we'll probably try one 400. Couple more. So you run one individual.
Do you know what team I could be on?
I don't. I have to sit down and figure that all out.
It's like Gio really wants me to be on his beat.
I looked just to make sure.
Okay. So I'll sit down and see how everyone is. Maybe we'll have a nice 50-meter dash or something. Figure it out.
Yo, big down, dude.
Got a lot of speed out there.
I just need to get like better at like my try time. It's really bad.
Oops, it's still going.